This is The Storied Outdoors, a podcast somewhere between Lewis and Tolkien and Lewis and Clark, finding clarity in the stories we tell and the adventures that shape us. Welcome to The Storied Outdoors. My name is Brad Hill, and I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Brian Gill. And we are joined today by Brandon Bales. Brandon is born and raised in North Alabama, just minutes away from the foothills of Tennessee. Brandon can still call this beautiful rural setting his home alongside his wife, his two sons, and two adventurous dogs. Growing up, he spent countless hours hunting, fishing, trapping, and exploring the woods and streams around his house, and he hasn't stopped even to this day. He says, "I'm convinced that the woods and the water make you a student for life." Brandon works full-time for NASA, but on the side, he is a pure artist when it comes to tying flies. He's a commercial fly tyer designer for fulling mills. He sits on tire boards for several companies like Ahrex hooks. We just heard about them from Wade. Very excited about what's going on with Ahrex and Wade. But HMH Vises and Dr. Slick tools, to name a few. His flies have been featured in several books, in like Smallmouth Flies, Top to Bottom by Jake Villwock, and Aaron Reed's Flyfishing Austin and Central Texas. I was recently, Brandon, out in Austin visiting a friend of mine in Temple, and I went fishing with one of the guys from Living Waters Fly Fishing.
Oh, yeah.
And he knew about you and asked me, did I know you? And I was like, yes, I actually have met Brandon. You know, I live on the opposite end of the state from Brandon, but I actually have met him. So that was a cool connection. But we met you, Brian and I, last summer when we came up. That was our first time to catch a smallmouth bass. And that very day, we ran into you along those same waters, and you gave us a couple of little bitty crawfish patterns, and man, they're incredible. And we're just honored to have you join us today, brother. So thanks for joining the Storied Outdoors.
Yeah. Thank y'all for having me. Yeah, it was a sort of a neat circumstance just to bump into y'all, on one of my little outings, for smallmouth. So that was cool. And like we were talking about before we started recording, it was I got to hear a little bit of the story about the one that got away and what all you got to see, and the unique setting that we have up here. So yeah, it's always fun on the streams here.
Brandon, you've been doing this fly fishing and fly tying for a long time. Who was it that exposed you to fly fishing?
Well, no one, believe it or not, no one in my family fly fishes. I'm the only one. Um,
That's the same
what I
for me.
always tell, yeah. So what I always
That's our
tell
story.
people, yeah. So even as far as hunting, my dad, he years ago he was a quail hunter, but he never did anything else, really in the outdoors. But my grandfather, they lived, they had a farm right in front of our house, and that was sort of the treat was help granddad out in the garden or in the wood shop or doing whatever. A lot of times it was just what I figured out over time, but I know this because I do it now. He was trying to spark my creativity. So
Mm.
he had he he worked on the Redstone Arsenal, and in his off time he gardened and had a woodworking shop. And he would carve. He loved birds. He would carve birds and paint and do all these different things. Um, and so at the end of the day, when it was warm weather, they had this spring-fed creek that he grew up on across the road from his house. And he would tell me that my first vivid memory, and I always tried to just think about how it used to be, but he grew up on Panther Branch is the name of the spring creek. It's
Mm.
actually technically it's six different small springs that come out of the ground, and they meet pretty much right in front of their property. And he told me when he was younger, his grandfather um, worked somewhere close to Tennessee, and Tennessee, of course, stocks trout in a lot of the rivers. And he knew a guy that worked at the hatchery, and he would get these leftover rainbows, and he lived just close enough to where he would make it back home. He would toss them in Panther Branch. This is back in the 1930s. And my granddad said, "Yeah, I remember. We would spend all summer catching those trout out of the creek that he put in there, and we would end up, they would cook them and eat them. So the water, I mean, I remember
Must have
that.
stayed pretty cold. And
Oh yeah, I mean, it would. I remember as a kid, it would take my breath when I would step in the water. So I
mm,
mean, um, so no one really fly fished in my family, but it, there was just when I was out with my granddad, everything sort of centered around Panther Branch, this little creek. That's where we could go explore. So that's sort of that combined with knowing at one time there was trout in there, of course stock, but just that idea, I would look in Field and Stream magazines and see pictures of these guys fly fishing. I'm like, man, that would be so cool. So I would, in my mind, I was thinking like, I want to go out west and fish for these trout. But little did I know, and I found out, years later on that, I had, it's one of those things I appreciate what I have now because I don't have trout, but I have, these beautiful sunfish and
mm.
spotted bass. And like you guys saw, it's 15 minutes from my house, but smallmouth. I mean, it's, there's, like I said, I appreciate what I have.
Mm.
And although I do love traveling, I don't know. I just home water is where it's at for me.
That Panther Branch, is that kind of a nod to your granddad that your the bugs, like, I think Panther Branch bugs,
That's
or
like that's your handle,
that's
right?
your
Your
handle,
Instagram
right?
handle.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. So, yeah, I remember early on, I was trying to think like, it was like, well, what do we call these? Or what are you doing here? And, right before I submitted my first pattern to Fooling Mills, which it's a grasshopper pattern. And they're like, what are you calling this? So, like, most people put their last name in front of the pattern. And I
Mm.
was like, well, I was trying to think and I was like, well, I come up, I sort of come up with the idea of this grasshopper because that's what I used on Panther Branch. So I was
Mhm.
like, well, Panther Branch bugs just sort of went well together. So
I love
I've
it.
kept it ever since. So
That's so good. I love that
yeah.
story because there's a little history and legacy there, and
Hmm.
makes it so much. There's a richness in that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
What's your first memory of fly fishing? As the first time that you went out and did it, probably ought to be fresh because you're like us. I mean, both of us have that kind of a story. No one fly fished in our family that we knew of, and we
Hmm.
picked it up. I picked it up in college, and
Yeah.
just you got some VHS tapes and taught myself.
Yeah. Yes. I was probably I was probably 11 or 12 years old. Again, I worked around my granddad, and he would let me do some chores to make some money. If there was something, and I had my eye on I just wanted a fly rod. I just wanted to try a fly rod, and um, big box store had, I'm sure like most of them started out a full kit, the rod, the line, the reel, and a couple of flies. And it's funny thinking about it now because my earliest memory, I can remember they would let me. There's a bridge at each end of the street, and I could walk downhill to the. I could walk to the bridge downhill, and they could still see me. So it was like, okay, you can go down there. We can see that you're okay. Went down there and had these what they were. They were just trout flies, some little dries. I didn't know what this. I was like, oh, this is a bug. So I tied on a little black um, dry fly. It was actually an Adams, but it was tied in all black with some grizzly hackle, and no idea about floatant, nothing like that. And it had rained probably a day or two before, and the water was a little murky. And I can remember, of course, my cast was awful, but I was able to get it out just a few feet next to the bank, and I would just left the current. I didn't know what I was doing this time, but I was actually swinging. But my dry flies were turning into soft tackles, and every time it would get near the bank and it would start to swing down, a little longer sunfish or like a red breast sunfish would come out and grab it and try to go back under the bank. And of course, I don't even know what size tippet was pre-rigged on this rod, but I broke off like almost every fly that I had, just because I was so excited. And I finally got in one little, really colorful red breast, and that again, people you probably see a lot of times. I post lots of pictures of. I think that creek and that first fish, it's just ingrained in my mind as like something special, and it's sort of nostalgic to me. So I've, I'm still doing the same thing today that I was at 11, 12 years old.
It's a gateway drug, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Just never left it.
Man, those sunfish, there's just so much beauty in those fish. I mean, and the water temperature and the water clarity, all of it affects how they look. It's just a beautiful, beautiful creation.
Almost
Oh, it really
tropical,
does.
some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, they really do look tropical.
So you started out with a black Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably be called a Wednesday Adams here if it was created this in 2023.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure.
What would so when did you start tying your own flies?
I was probably, I didn't start tying my own flies until, let's see, my oldest son is 16. It
He's
was
quite the fisherman
probably,
too, though, isn't he?
well, so that's my youngest,
Your
my
youngest
11 year
one.
old.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I want to circle back to some of his stories in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
My 16-year-old, so, he, he's like into baseball. He's a phenomenal baseball player. And I tell him, like, I was just never a good athlete, so I had to fly fish. Like that's or tie flies. I do this man crafting at the Vice. Um, but I was probably in my early to mid 20s when I started tying. Um, just because it was something to do to sort of extend the season. Um, but you know, I it got a lot more serious, and I've told this story many times. But when my youngest was 2, he got hospitalized, and it just turned out, since I'm a government worker, we were all also furloughed at the same time as he was hospitalized. It turns out he was on antibiotics for like strep throat or an ear infection. But we got a call from the church. He went to Mother's Morning Out, and they said he'd had a seizure, which scared me to death because that's just a scary word to me.
Yeah.
And we had never experienced anything like that with him, so we rushed him to the ER. He was actually, thank the Lord, he was on antibiotics for the strep throat or whatever, but it was partially treating meningitis that they diagnosed him with.
Oh, wow.
So we spent, I want to say 12 to 14 days, probably about 10 days in the hospital. Then we came home and he had a PICC line. And this, I hate to admit this, but I'm a worrier, and I worried a lot about him. My wife is in the medical field. She's a practitioner now. She was a registered nurse back then. But so I couldn't sleep at night. So there was nothing to do. So I would come and sit at my vise, and I would just tie flies, and I would sort of escape, the stress for a little bit, and I could go back in and sort of be relaxed and go to sleep. So that sort of led into me starting to create things. As I should back up and say, as a kid, I always was into drawing and painting.
I
Like
was
I
going
told
to
you, my
ask you
granddad.
if there was any
Yeah,
other arts that you were interested in.
yeah. I mean, with my granddad, we did a lot of wood carving and whittling and things like that. So there was always some form of art that I was around. This just really opened the doors. Whereas before, it was more of an essential thing, like, oh, I need some of these. Let me just halfway throw some woolly buggers together, to go out fishing. But for whatever reason, this sort of became a therapy to me after a while. And from my son's illness, once he got better, it just sort of carried on and creative things started happening. And just, yeah, it's been going ever since.
It's some of the most beautiful flies I've ever seen, man. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, the kind that you tie with the deer hair, I mean, that they look too pretty to fish. I mean, they look like something you'd put on a wall.
I've thought that a couple of times. Like,
Yeah,
man, I don't know that I could put that out there, man. That's awesome looking.
that's what and I tell everybody, I'm like, I've had people tell me that, and I'm like, I don't I don't know that um I don't know that I could just tie a fly that was good enough. You know, I know that I could, but for whatever reason, I can't let something go until I think that it's, to a certain perfection.
Mm.
Um, and even then, I'll tell guys, they're like, "Man, I can't fish this." I'm like, "Hey, I know the guy that ties them. So if you lose it, we can we can do it all over again."
Do you feel like do you get satisfaction in the product of the tying, the process, or are you, man, I mean, you kind of just alluded to it. I mean, the if you lose that fly, is it, I mean, is it something that you're frustrated at, or is it you're really hoping to catch, big fish out of these things? I mean, it seems like that you almost have two different worlds. It's like the art side of it where you're getting satisfaction, and then you get to actually use it for some utility side of it. Where
Yeah,
are you fall on
absolutely.
that?
I mean, to me, it's funny because, and just like you talked about, it changes. So whenever I'm at the Vice, um, and I'm making the fly, I want it to look absolutely perfect. And while I'm tying it, I know good and well, if it say it's for me personally, I know I'm going to fish it. Um, it used to really bother me if I lost a fly. I mean, like
That's a lot of
I'll
work.
still go to a certain extent to retrieve them if I can, but
Yeah.
but
I saw
but
there was a meme or something this past week that somebody sent me on Instagram, and it was some guy like defying death, and it was like, this is what a fly fisherman would do to get that fly back.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've done it before. Gone in way deeper than I should, or gone over to a tree that looked way too snaky that I shouldn't even be around to get a fly back. But it's funny because, like I said, at the Vice, tie them to I tie them to be fish, but I tie them to, you know as close to perfect in my mind as I can get. And then again, if it's my fly personally, usually I tie for a specific reason or a specific even fish. Um, for instance, there was this one smallmouth that I knew was in this deep hole. This is at a place, a farm in Tennessee that has a really cool little creek off the main river. And I was like, I had seen this smallmouth, and actually, my buddy, this is a whole nother story, but my buddy had hooked it and then immediately handed the rod to my 11-year-old son and said, "Hey, you reel it in," because he thought he had hooked a big drum, because it came up and jumped. And I was like, that didn't look like a drum. That had a lot more bronze color to it, but it was so big that even then I was like, oh, maybe it was a carp just doing something really funny. I've never seen a carp jump, but maybe, this is in really fast water too. He ended up, my son was like, oh yeah, it is a carp. And he just reefs on, this was with a spinning rod. He reefs on it, breaks the, breaks the line and loses the fish. And, um, so my buddy, this is one from Gulf Shore or Orange Beach. So he had to leave. So he leaves with this horrible memory of like
I know
thinking,
that feeling.
yeah, it's like he he was just being kind and letting my son catch this drum, quote unquote, that ended up being a really big fish. And I remember coming home, I told him, I said, I'm going to take a picture of that fish whenever I catch. I was like, I know where that fish is. It stays in that area. So, because I caught some nice fish there. And he's like, man, I really hope you do. He's like, send me a picture. And like, I came home, tied up some flies, waited for the water to be perfect condition. Like, I go overboard sometimes. I was watching the gauge flows online and I was like, okay, now I can go. And I tied a streamer just for that specific fish. And the second, didn't catch anything the first day. The second day I went, I ended up catching him, and it was a 21.5 inch smallmouth as my
Good night.
biggest. And I mean, it was just like a giant football.
Yeah.
But
No
Wow.
wonder he thought it was a drum.
oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, so you see, that's why I knew that that fly was either going to get lost or just get crushed by a fish and probably shredded up by, and it did by one that size, even tying it pretty well. But I wasn't upset. I was like,
No, not with a fish that
I
big.
tied it to perfection, and now the fly's hanging up on the wall.
It's been retired.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an interesting, is a sweet little line, and if you've ever read A River Runs Through It, and I know a lot of fly fishermen, will kind of like poo poo on. They're like, oh, that's the classic. Of course you've read that, but or you watched the movie. Hardly anybody's read the book, unfortunately, but it's a
Yeah.
wonderful book.
Yeah.
And he talks about there's a buddy of theirs that ties a lot of their flies, and he tells this story about how he didn't tie them from his point of view. He tried to tie flies from a fish's point of view. So he had an aquarium filled up, and he would put the fly in the water, and he would lay up underneath the aquarium. He had a little rig where he could lay up underneath the aquarium and see what the fish sees.
Yeah.
So when you're tying flies, what are some of the things that you're doing? Because we see the top, and a lot of people will tie flies, and that looks good from the top, but that's not what a fish sees. They see what's on the bottom. So, like, I always thought that was a pretty cool little story, especially on a book that was written that long ago. But
Oh, yeah.
when you're tying, what's your approach to that part of the work?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely the approach I take is, like, I first take into consideration like the silhouette of, a particular fly that I'm tying. Like, is it giving off the correct silhouette? And then the second thing is the action. Is it doing what it's supposed to, or is it making a commotion that will trigger a strike or anything like that? And then really third, and I mean, the looks really are in last place for me. But I mean, I know good and well, like, for instance, like the deer hair frogs, unless the eyes are really bulged out, you can look underneath, and the fish can't see the eyes or the different colored dots on top of the frog's back. That's just sort of, that's more for us
That's to
as
catch.
fishermen.
That's to catch the fisherman.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I go silhouette, action, and then last is looks as far as like cosmetics.
Yeah,
Um,
that's interesting.
and two, and whenever you create a fire, at least whenever I do, a lot of times I want to solve a problem. There's something missing. Like, I gave you guys, uh, or when I saw you guys out with Wade, that Dad gave y'all some little crawfish.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if they were either some of my buddy in Arkansas, Dwayne. He has the creek crawler, which I tie and fish. They're a little bit bigger, but then there's my the little hatchling crawl.
That's what I have.
That's what
Yeah.
I have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one, for example, I came up with that because, like, on Panther Branch and some of these smaller creeks and streams, there's no need for a huge 2-3 inch long crawfish if I'm using, and especially they're usually pretty heavily weighted because you want to get them on the bottom and just sort of crawl
Mm.
them. But and I know the fish in these streams eat crawfish, but what I noticed was there were these little tiny. A lot of times they're freshly like molted, but for the most part, I would find tons of these really small crawfish. And I looked and looked, and I'd seen a couple of patterns online, but still they were big. I mean,
Yeah.
even an inch long. I want something tiny like the juveniles I'd seen, something that like a sunfish could get in its mouth. So that's how the little hatchling crawl came about. I wanted that's there's an issue or a problem that I wanted to solve. I wanted to be able to feed these smaller fish or fish with smaller mouths, something that they see and eat on a regular basis. Then I got the silhouette the way I wanted it, and then from there, the last thing was the looks. I could use a different backing material, something like that, but yeah, the main thing was to get it down in a small enough size and have that silhouette. So
Yeah. My a friend of ours has been on the show before. Um, Lives out in Texas. That was who I was visiting when I was telling you I'd gone out there and met the guys from Living Waters. But he also Chase also ordered some flies from you, and he
yeah,
told
he
me
did. Okay, yeah, I
he,
remember Chase.
he told me to tell you that they've been smashed out there in his little creeks
Good,
in Temple,
good.
Texas. So yeah, man. So they work in Texas too, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. So I got to ask. So when you went out fishing, were you with Chris Johnson?
Yes, I was with
Okay,
Chris.
yeah. Chris is a great guy. Yeah, me
Yeah,
and Chris, at like the first, yeah, I guess it was like the first summer of COVID. Maybe, yeah, I guess that's when. Anyway, I went out there and stayed a few days in Round Rock, and
great area.
we fished, and it was right up my alley, like Brushy Creek. I mean,
Yep, that's
I
where we
took,
fished.
yeah, I mean, I could have spent, and I did spend. Chris actually was trying to nudge me. He's like, "Hey, let's. I think we're going to go. We did go to San Gabriel to fish for Guadalupe bass, and I caught some, but I was enamored by those Rio cichlids.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
I couldn't get away because they're
unique,
so
man.
foreign to me, but they're beautiful.
They
And
are.
I had the little crawfish, and actually Chris has a really good small crawfish pattern. He uses
Yeah,
the Rio Bandito, I think
yep.
is the
We
name of
fished
it.
those. We fished that
Oh,
fly.
yeah, so and those things work awesome.
Yeah, and he's a tire for how do you say it? Is it Umpqua? How do you say that right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, he's a designer for them, I think, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Really
that
cool
fly.
guy.
He has that fly and several others actually.
Yeah, they have a great fly shop. If you're ever in whoever's listening, if you're ever in Round Rock, Texas, man, swing by Living Waters Fly Fishing. That's a great shop.
Oh, absolutely. It's awesome out there.
Brandon, do you have a favorite fly that you like to tie?
Man, that changes weekly.
Well, I
Or
was thinking that you might say that just because of you're like you said, you're solving a problem. So
yeah,
it's
The
whichever
next
problem
one,
the next one.
yeah. No, honestly, um, if I could pick two, it would. I really do, and I enjoy. A, no surprise here, but deer hair. I actually the smaller uh, deer hair frogs. I enjoy tying those um, because they're sort of it's one of those things. I don't know how you guys are with your fishing style, but uh, I love smallmouth. I chase smallmouth a ton, but 95% of the time, I've got a I've got a glass four weight with me, and that's what I use. Is like I've got six, sevens, eights that if I'm just going out for smallmouth, I'll carry a 6 or 7 weight. Usually just a six, unless the water's up or something, or bigger rivers. But most of the time, I'm at the stage of my life that I enjoy catching everything. So I have the glass four weight and those smaller frogs. I've caught smallmouth on them. Redbreast can eat them. Bluegill can eat them. You know, I've caught some pretty nice red eye bass. Some let's see, warrior, yeah, mostly warrior red eye bass on them. So they're just they're another thing you don't see a lot of is smaller deer hair bugs. Um, that's really why I enjoy the most.
It looks like such a. I would love to see that process in person. I know you posted a lot of making videos and things like that on your page and all
Hmm.
that, but man, it's just the intricacies of just shaving that down into the shape. I mean, it's like whittling. You said that earlier, like you like the whittle, and it looks like you
Yep,
are whittling that hair down
that's
into the shape.
that's exactly what you're doing. I mean, you know, you it's a, when you're done stacking the hair, it's just a big puff ball, and you sort of have to, I'll rough trim with scissors, but then I've got 200 double-edged razor blades sitting here that I just grab one and you start whittling, carving away a little at a time, and you just sort of you see that shape come about real slow. It's funny, before you guys called, I know I told you I was having trouble getting connected with you guys. I lost track of time. I have a friend that lives just a few miles down the road, and I think he used to duck hunt quite a bit. Anyway, he saw I tied up a mallard the other day, a deer hair mallard.
Yeah, that thing looked cool. I saw
Yeah,
that.
and he said, "Hey man, would you tie me up two of those?" And so, I mean, he just wanted two flies, but I ended up like making this display, like a hen mallard and the the drake, and they're like coming in flying. And I walked out in the field with my lab to where there was some hay, found some sage grass I could put in the sink. It's like, you know,
Oh
just
man, I
just
love
taking
I
that.
it way
love
too
it.
far.
I love it. That's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, you talked earlier about the sort of the therapy during that season with your son.
Hmm.
Of the creation of this. The creativity of making something with your hands, and um, how is that time? And as you move on, is as it continued to be that not just not just therapy, but time for you to it helps you translates perhaps even to your work. I mean, the work that you do is certainly not mundane at NASA. So the patience that it takes to do that, has it been a thing that has used to it's changed you as a person and your work? Has it enhanced your work in your professional work?
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think it goes both ways because I've also always, and I don't want to get like super deep here, but
Let's go.
as as a kid, I can look back, and my wife, me and her have had long talks about it, but there was definitely some. I don't know. Well, nothing bad. I always had OCD as a kid. I mean, like in a negative way, as like a young child. And to be honest, I joke about it, like with my tying, like, oh yeah, I'm just a little OCD. I actually, through lots of time and effort and just a lot of work, I sort of turned that into a positive.
Mm,
Instead of it being something that debilitates me, you turn that energy into something positive. You know, at work, of course, NASA, space stuff that's going to outer space, it's got to be done to the T. I mean, there's something
yeah.
bad that's going to happen.
I mean, somebody's
Um,
life's at stake here. I mean, we've
yeah,
all watched
exactly.
Apollo 13. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing. It's like I've always been detail oriented in everything that I do. Um, and like I said, I think it. I don't know which way it goes. It's like in the tying and it works. It's like in all areas of my life. But like I said, I've learned um, once I became an adult, I learned slowly over time to turn it into something positive, and not affect me in a negative way. And I think it's so far it's working. So,
Do, doing the work that you do with NASA, I just thought of this and I have to ask it. When you're, if you're ever watching a movie that has to do with outer space, say The Martian, are you going, nope, that's not how that works?
yeah, I tend to pick it apart. Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
bet.
I'm not gonna lie, you
I
know.
bet. I can totally imagine that, man. That's awesome.
Or I'm pointing out like what's what in the background of the ship, like, oh, well, that instrument does this, or But I
That's
mean,
amazing.
that's the thing though with my work, and the fun thing is where whenever I'm at my vice, I'm actually creating
Mm,
something. At work, which we create these tests, but what happens just like a brief background. A customer will come to us, say, like there's a customer that has a solar panel. They want to stick it in outer space, and they say, "Hey," uh, they'll come to our division saying, "Hey, what will happen to my solar panel if I stick it in outer space for 5 years?" Well, we have these huge vacuum chambers, and we say, "Okay, give us a piece of the solar panel. We'll stick it in there, pull down the atmosphere so it's a negative pressure, so whatever
whoa.
it is in outer space. Then we can mount different with ports. We can mount different instruments and shoot it with radiation. We can shoot it with heat, cold, and so we get to break their stuff and say, "Hey, here's what happened in 5 years."
It's gonna break.
Yeah, yeah,
It's gonna break. I can tell you what's gonna happen to it. It's gonna break.
yeah.
So you're
So
breaking stuff at work and making stuff at home, huh?
yeah, yeah,
I like it.
Brandon, I love that, man. You're basically, what you've been able to do. You've been able to kind of redeem this OCD,
hmm
for something good.
yeah,
That's good.
It's like this, Andrew Peterson writes about it, adorning the dark, and we're kind of called to redeem those places that we're in. And, and sometimes, I've even felt like, yeah, trying to redeem the sadness of losing my dad or losing a loved one, replacing those negative emotions with something positive. And so that's really cool, man. I love the way you have approached that. Um, are there other kind of life lessons or things that you've been able to kind of see, maybe that are connected with your faith, through fishing or fly tying, or being in the outdoors, that maybe lessons that you've learned over the years?
yeah. I always, I keep going back to talking about small streams, but there's something so. I think the reason I've always stayed and loved the small streams, is it's so intimate. Everything there, you go and you sort of, well, just like that mallard that I tied the other day. Literally, I was out. I wasn't fishing. I was out. My youngest son loves to hunt, and hunting season's winding, or deer season's winding down. So I was getting stuff up for the season, and it was getting close to dark. And I've just over the years I've gotten this habit. Um, I take everything pretty slow, and I take it all in. And I remember I was sitting there, and in the little spring, it's actually beaver dam that they just beavers. We call it the beaver pond. It's one of the springs they always dam up, but there was a mallard, and I just sat, and he didn't know I was there. I didn't want to disturb him, and I just sort of took it all in. And I don't know that I could. I sit there and thought about it, or actually on the walk back home, I thought, I don't know that I could. This is going to sound silly. I don't know if I could survive anywhere else. Like, for some reason, I need that. That for whatever reason, just being out there, whether it be on the water or in the woods, and I'm sort of a part of it. I'm not an intruder, or I'm not disturbing it. And I try to take in everything. I mean, not just that mallard, like, what bugs are out, like, and then the whole time I'm thinking, wow, this was all created. like this didn't just happen. Like God made all this, and it's just it blows my mind. Like I'm always so thankful. Like thank you for letting me just even be a part of this. And
Mm.
so I come home and I get so inspired that I sit down at a vise and I pulled out deer hair and feathers. I'm thinking same thing. Like this came from, a deer, something wild. And so it's just repurposing all these things. Um, I don't know. It's to me, it's the full gamut, the full circle for me from anything from, even heck, uh, we still, my youngest son, like I say, loves to hunt. If we go out and say he wants to squirrel hunt, I use the fur for dubbing. I make sure he eats the fried squirrel whenever my wife's not around, because, but I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's the whole process of it. I don't know. It always makes me just grateful for all of it and for where I live, honestly.
Mm, that's so good. I I love the that idea of slowing down and really looking around and taking it all in. I mean, that's so
Hmm.
good for us because it really is what we need to do.
Oh yeah,
Uh, we need that. I mean, a part of that, I think, is Sabbath. I mean, God calls us to Sabbath
yeah,
rest and invites us
absolutely.
into a Sabbath rest. And so when we go at that sort of pace of life, that we are able to look around and notice the bugs. And that's another thing I love. That's probably one of the things I love about fly fishing is we're not throwing out this artificial bait that's purple, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we're really paying attention to what is hatching, and the nature of the sport causes us to slow down and be a little more observant, to read
hmm,
the water. We're not
hmm,
just throwing over there by just any structure. If you're on, especially those creeks, I mean, those creeks, you need to read the water and kind of get an idea of where fish are going to be, but you can't do that in a hurry. You have to
absolutely.
slow down, take your time, and that is so so good for our soul and so needed in today's world.
Oh
uh
yeah,
I think too, and for you, I mean, man, you're creating, and when you're making these magnificent flies, I mean, creating is bringing you closer to the creator. I mean,
no, it really is.
we're made in his image and he's a maker. And so to see somebody like you with excellence and taking time to not that you're going to ever achieve perfection, but you're working towards that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
You're trying to make something that's honoring, and man, I think it honors him. And so, man, that is such a cool way to use those gifts, man.
Yeah, that's what I strive to do. I mean, uh, and I tell people I'm like, hey, if it going back to even people saying, well, I don't know if I want to fish this. I'm like, look, if you don't want to fish it, as long as it puts a smile on your face, then I've done my job. Like, if I am not offended if you never fish it. I'm not offended if you fish it and until it falls apart and whatever. And I have to make like doesn't as long as I made you smile and I try to pass that along. Like exactly what you just talked about. It's one of those things, and both of you guys know when uh, there's certain ways to approach or bring about what your faith is to people. And it's one of those things. Let's try to put just a snippet in with any flies I send out. Just something. I feel like that's the least I could do because I was. I think everybody's given a talent, born with a purpose, and it should be my job to somehow pass along in some small way.
Well, man, you're doing a fantastic job of being a good steward of the gift that you've been given. I mean, it truly is a beautiful thing that you do. You put art into the world, but also people get to catch big fish with them. So that
Yeah,
seems like
Yeah,
a pretty good combination.
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
win-win. I mean,
yeah. It is.
it looks cool, but it also, man, you're gonna catch them. It's gonna fool the fish for sure.
Yeah.
Brandon, is there a is there a particular story um, that's kind of shaped you as a man? A particular outdoor experience, from your childhood, from your, you know, 20s, or anything like that. I mean, for me, I feel like those are constantly happening. I look at my
Right.
son, I look at my daughter, whenever they're in the outdoors and they're experiencing these things. And you do such a good job of balancing a son who likes to fish and a son who likes to play baseball, and and supporting them in both their ways. But how about you? What's been an experience in the outdoors that shaped you as a man?
Uh, that there's it's not just a particular instance, but and this might sound like nothing big to a lot of people, but going back to whenever I was a kid, going to Panther Branch with my grandfather, um, I can just remember uh, how we would get to these really deep holes, and I told you the water was so cold that it would just take your breath. And and the funny thing with my granddad, on Sundays he was dressed up. Sundays he wore his church clothes all day. But the rest of the week, Monday through Saturday, he worked on Redstone Arsenal. As He was actually a supervisor over the pipe fitters, and he would wear these really thin blue coveralls. He would come home from work, clean up, and put on a second pair or a clean pair of blue overalls and go or coveralls and go work in the garden or do something in his shop. I asked my grandmother one time, does he own any shorts or t-shirts? And she said, no, he's never worn shorts. And it was funny because when we would go to the creek, we were waiting, but he was wearing these blue coveralls waiting in, the Alabama summer. And I can just remember in my mind, it's funny, I'm 40 years old and I still can almost hear the water. It's almost like I can close my eyes and look down and see. I felt like he would carry me across the deep holes. And I was like, man, this guy is so strong. He's picking me up and carrying me across these deep holes, and he's not even shivering. And I can remember looking down and thinking, man, he's really tall. He's able to carry me all the way across here, and I'm not even touching the water. And, you know, it sounds like a silly thing, but then I've done that now with my both of my sons when they were little.
Mm.
I've got a picture in my office at work of me holding my oldest son's hand when I don't know, he's maybe 6 years, no, he's 5 years old. And I've got my youngest son. My wife had one of those, some kind of wrap where you wear the baby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had my youngest stuffed in one of those. My wife was with us. She was on the bank. But anyway, my oldest son wanted to go out and fish this one little deep section of the creek. And I had baby in the little raft, and then I had him. And my wife took a picture when we were walking back, and I have that in my office of me holding on to my oldest and got the youngest strapped on me. And I don't know, it was almost again like a full circle. Like
Mm.
I still can remember like how I thought my granddad was like the strongest man in the world because he could pick me up over barbed wire fences or carry me across the creek. And um but then I ended up doing it with my kids, and I would hope they would think the same thing about me when they have those memories. And I don't know why that's always stuck in my head about him. And um there's many reasons that I looked up to him, but for some reason that one particular memory, and I'm sure it happened many times when we were out fishing or wading or just flipping rocks. And there was one other instance where whenever I was in high school or middle school, I couldn't drive yet, and uh, I exempted my test for like around Christmas, the end of the fall semester. So he came and checked me out. He did. He never hunted. I mean, he didn't even own a gun that I know of. And but I wanted to hunt, and my great aunt had some property, and I just it's sort of funny now, but I remember he picked me up from school and took me over to my great aunt's, and he went. Uh, I guess we'll call it hunting, but it was I actually it was I was into bow hunting at that time, so I had a bow, and I mean I didn't have a stand. It was just like we're just going walking in the woods with a bow, pretty much. But I just remember he never complained. He never did anything. He just sort of stayed back and let me do my thing. And I can remember I came back to where the back or the front side of the property where we started or where I started, and he was just sitting on a log and was looking through some rocks he had collected that he thought were pretty. And it's like, but again, he for whatever reason that was just as fun to him. He was, he encouraged what I was interested in, and never complained, never a cross word about it. And again, I like to think that I'm sort of like him, and he just, he sat there and found beauty in rocks that were around a stump he was sitting at. So yeah, I mean those. I like to think. I don't know if it's genetic or if that made an impression, you know, on my brain or what, but I mean that's always sort of stuck with me.
Sure. I mean, there's no amount of money that can buy presence. He was present with you, and
Exactly.
that his presence that's a huge impact. You can't buy
Hmm.
that. There's no other way to do that than to be present.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so what a treasure, man.
Oh,
Sounds
absolutely.
sounds like a great man.
Yep.
I was we were Brad and I when we went to the Atlanta fly fishing show.
Hmm.
And on the way we went through some back roads through kind of northwest Georgia, and we passed a house that was kind of set off to the road, and there was a 55-gallon drum that was smoking, and somebody was burning trash. And
Hmm.
I remember vividly my granddaddy burning trash at his house. And they didn't have trash pickup. I mean, that's how you disposed of it all.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
but man, just little things like that, I mean, it wasn't a significant part of my childhood burning trash, but it was something that stuck out to me and made me think about my own granddad this past weekend.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how those things work.
Yeah, it's also funny. It's the funny things that we remember, and we as parents, we want them to remember things, and they don't remember that. They
No.
remember the insignificant things, that I'm oblivious to. And
Uh-huh.
my son Leo would be like, "You remember this?" I go, "Yeah, I guess I do." Like, but it was
Yeah, sure.
meaningful to him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh man, what's I love these. Like this is like a sort of a mixed bag. We call it a digital campfire. Do you have any like a campfire story that's like one of those little short, little punchy like campfire stories that you would love to tell around? It can be funny, or we had Hank from Hank's Bait Shop told a great bear story. If you got a bear story, those are always fun.
Oh,
Fish
yeah.
story, bear story.
I've got
Plane
a,
stories, anything like that.
let's see, I've got,
Near death experiences.
well, I guess, yeah, I guess we could call it near death, or it felt like it. I was on, actually where I saw you guys or met you guys the first time. I was on this creek there further north. Um, I've told this story several times. I was fishing one morning. It was God, I just remember it was so hot and humid, and got out super early because it's like I wanted to hit that morning topwater bite, be done, be back home before the heat of the day. Um, got out, and it was one of those mornings where just you get out and everything's going wrong. You tripping over your boot laces and just everything. Well, I get in the water and I'm fishing along, and there's this one big root ball that I had always cast. It was like there's always a fish there, and I actually lost a pretty nice one there probably 2 weeks before. So I sneak up there because the water's low, and well, it's actually a little ledge, and I step off to where I'm about knee deep, and and this I'll get to this later, but nowadays I've gotten away from waders a little bit, but there was a period after this incident I wore waders for a really long time. Now whether they would have helped me or not, I don't know, but I was wearing shorts this morning and I'm casting to this root ball, nothing's happening, and I'm like, man, I just got to get there's this little, almost like a little side channel that I wanted to get to. It's like I know a fish is sitting there. I try to haul off and make a accurate cast. It's one of those things. I make the back cast and the forward cast. My line just never comes forward, and I feel a tug, and it's hung in the tree behind me. So normally, if I wasn't frustrated, I would just walk over and undo it, because it was low enough I could grab the branch. So I'm frustrated, so I keep yanking on the rod, or the line. Finally, the fly comes flying back. It didn't break off. I'm like, okay. So I start fishing again, and I don't know, I would say a minute after that happens, something like grazes my leg.
Stop it.
And I jump like completely out of the water. And I'm kicking, I'm just going nuts. Well, it was a stick that had broke off from the limb I was yanking on. So I finally calmed down. I'm like, man, I thought that was a snake. And I'm like, thank goodness. So my heart finally slows down. I start fishing again. About another minute goes by and something rubs up against my leg again. And I'm like, that stick is snagged on my fly line. So I take my right leg and I kick. And whenever I do, I feel it up against my left leg. I'm like, what is the deal with the stick? I look down and there's a cottonmouth that looks like it's the size of a baseball bat swimming between my legs.
Oh my gosh.
He or she swims between my legs, goes over to the root ball, climbs up on it where I was fishing, and just sort of pulls up and sits there and watches me. Like, hey, I'm just going to warn you this time.
Whoa.
It was one of those instances where I called my wife and I was telling her what happened, but this sounds silly until this has happened to you. I could not make myself step out of the water onto grass. I know that sounds weird, because there's tall grass I had to step through, but in my mind, all that tall grass was full of snakes. Like I could not. I had to get courage to finally just take a step into the grass.
When you see one, they're everywhere in your mind from then on. It's
yeah. Fishing's over for the day.
You're in a hive.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in a hive. Oh gosh.
Yeah, I mean yeah, and so yeah, that was definitely scary moment. One other really quick one, same creek.
Let me just say, I would have been glad I didn't have waders on, because those waders would have been ruined.
Yeah,
so definitely had to hose them out inside out.
Good thing mine are brown.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I wore waders for the longest time after that. I don't know if they would, they're double stitched or double layered up front. I just felt better wearing waders.
Yeah.
I hate to admit I've got back to just wearing some fishing pants now, unless it's really cold. But the other part, my second incident on the same creek, like I said, further south this time, was in February. And it was a warm day, like today, like in the 60s. We'd had a couple of days of 60s, and I was like, oh man, I've got to go at least try and see if there's any fish out moving. So it was after church on Sunday. I came home, got my waders, headed down. And anyway, I fished for probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. I only caught 2 decent sized crappie. And I'm getting ready to leave. And I was like, well, I'll make my way around this bend. And I make my way around the bend and I fish another deep hole that's known to hold fish. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna give it up for the day. Turn around and start wading back, and all of a sudden I like hear something on the bank. I'm like, what is that? And I turn, meaning where I just walked past, and I see this alligator just slide off, and he had just come out of, I guess, hibernation, because he was like, he had been coated in mud, but then it dried, so he blended in perfectly with the bank. And you can understand. I mean, I know, Brad, you probably see alligators. I'm not used. I mean, we have them here, obviously, but they're like the snakes to me. I don't want to be around them. I don't know if they would hurt you or not. But anyway, he slid into the water with me, and I'm in like waist deep water. And me never being around alligators, I'm like freaking out.
Time to go.
And so again, and actually, I haven't visited that far south ever since, and that's been probably 7 or 8 years ago.
Wow.
I did good night alive. We grew up around, I had alligators all over the place in Eufaula.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
take your dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but good grief, I didn't know they were up this
Up
this
that
far.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And again, which that creek that you guys been on, it changes a whole lot when you go south. But it's really weird to have all those things in one creek. That's just something we're not used to around here, and you don't see
Yeah.
a whole lot.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Good night alive, man.
Yeah, so a couple of close calls, I guess you could say.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Especially with cottonmouth between your legs. Golly, man. I
Yeah.
gotta give you the things that make you go. Ooh, ooh.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight. I wish I could
Yeah. Oh
tie
yeah.
flies.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Time to
Woo.
bring out the watercolors tonight. I'm not gonna be able to sleep.
Oh man.
Man, Brandon, this has been awesome. One thing that we like to ask our guests is, what's your next adventure?
Next adventure. Well, let's see. I think March. We're gonna the kids' spring break. We're gonna try to get up to the Smokies. I've got to get my brook trout fixed. My youngest, he loves brook trout. He's never actually caught a southern Appalachian brook trout. He's caught the northern strains that they put in a lot of rivers.
Are those the bigger
Gonna do
ones?
that. What's that?
Are those the bigger ones?
The northern strain
The
is, yeah.
northern strain?
They're usually not as well. I say usually not as colorful. The ones that are stocked sort of have that bland color, and they do get bigger by far. So yeah, we're gonna try to do that. And then so starting in May, June, and 2 times in July. So this year, hope you don't mind me plugging this, but the Smallmouth Tour, I'm going to be a guide and instructor this year on the Ozark Smallmouth Tour.
Cool.
My friend Dwayne Hayda, his son-in-law Tad, Keith Reeves, and Ben Levin are the other guys, and so really, really neat opportunity. So again, there'll be a lot. I'll put out details and stuff, but yeah, May 27th is the first date. So what we do is we have what we call river or creek stops. So there'll be one weekend a month, except in July, there'll be two, where we will go, like in May, let's see, we go to the Washita River or Washita Wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'll be a Saturday and Sunday. So like Saturday, we'll bring in, I think they did a capacity of like 10, say, students or people come. But the first day we will do, like, we'll teach a topwater fly, a mid column fly, like some type of streamer, and then a bottom dweller is going to be a crayfish, crawfish of some type, probably Dwayne's creek crawler. And then we sort of go over techniques like, hey, because a lot of the guys that are interested in smallmouth, especially in the Ozarks, they're coming from a trout background. And the cool thing, and you guys probably noticed it too, the cool thing about smallmouth is they're almost sort of, they can be sort of trout like,
picky,
the way you approach them. Yeah.
Yep.
So
a little more refined. We'll say they're refined.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll call them more refined. So So we'll sort of go over techniques and how to, and then then the next day we actually take all the guys out, and all of us guides split up with say two guys, and we just go to these pristine rivers or whatever the stop's at, and we put them on fish, or they put their skills to test. I think it was either the Spring River, which so it's the Washita River, Kings River, Spring River, and then Crooked Creek, which Crooked Creek is it's a special place. Like it feels like home for me, like Crooked Creek.
Mm.
I went up last year and fished with Dwayne and his son-in-law and Keith just for fun. And I think we fished for 3 days. No, yeah, like 2.5 days, and caught like over 150 smallmouth.
Wow.
I mean,
Good night
yeah, I
alive.
mean, the thing there is it's 100% sight fishing. It's way different from here. It's all sight fishing. You really don't catch a lot on top. Tad was like, "Hey, Brandon, I need you to prove me wrong. Show me these smallmouth weak top water." And I caught some on some big foam dragonflies and one or two on a deer hair bug, but they key in on the crawfish, or like we had clouser minnows, and that you got to have something on the bottom bouncing near the bottom, or a little streamer. But it's a unique place, and so yeah, so that's really the big thing for me this year will be the smallmouth tour. I'm not gonna Probably won't be able to guide on all the stops. I think there's four right now. Um, I'm at least gonna do half of them.
That sounds awesome.
But yeah, but I'm hoping I can get some. I've got one or two guys from Alabama that are gonna try to come up and do it, because it's not just a smallmouth class. I would say it's more of like it's like a small stream or creek bass school, if you will.
Master class.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like you get out and you really learn how to. I mean, a lot of times you're stalking these fish because the water's so clear and low. So it's neat. It's a lot of fun. So that'll be the big thing for me this year.
Excellent. Man, that
Yeah,
sounds great.
yeah,
What a great opportunity.
yeah.
How what are ways that if people want to support you, or buy flies from you, how do people go about doing that, Brandon?
Um, well, the Fulling Mills, they still carry, commercial stuff is through them. I'm hoping there will be more commercial patterns of mine with them within the next year or two. I've been
Very cool.
talking with the guys about some of the really like I'm trying to get some of the smaller deer hair stuff in with them, because I think it all comes down to efficiency. I think I've got a way that they can make these smaller deer hair bugs that you just don't see in bins, but and
Hmm.
they'll still make money.
Hmm.
Um, so definitely Fulling Mills, and as far as like from me personally, what I've been doing here. So my New Year's resolution. Last year at one time I had a 4 month backlog of orders. I
I
mean,
believe it.
it was a lot, and it
Wow.
almost got to the point to where I had like burnout. I was just like
I
it
believe it.
became not fun. So
Mm.
what I've started doing, I've just been telling guys like, hey, if you see something, like I always ask questions. I mean, even if you want to tie some yourself, ask me. But I'm happy to help people out. But two, I mean, there's times like I was just telling you about the deer hair ducks I tied for my friend. Like I'll just tie stuff, say that I'm in the mood for, and what I usually do is I'll tie and then just put them up on my stories for sale.
Yeah.
That's I think that's going to be the way I go, at least for now. Just because, like I said, last year, man, the backlog was so heavy, and I did, demo, which I still love doing demos, but I was just was running on fumes towards the end of
Mhm.
summer. So,
I believe it.
um, so yeah, people can look at my Instagram, sort of keep up there, and I try to keep stuff moving on my stories as to what I'm tying, and people just grab as they see them.
We'll put all that link to your Instagram on our show notes and
Okay.
point people to you. If you're listening to this and you don't have any desire to tie a fly, but you want to see true art in this form, man, it would be worth checking out. So, man,
Absolutely. I agree with that.
you've got such a great eye for detail, and some of the sunfish patterns that you've tied are just phenomenal. But Brandon, thank you so much, man. Thank you for
Yeah, thank
joining us.
y'all.
Thanks for
I've really
sharing with
enjoyed
us.
it.
And you're a true treasure for Alabama and a part of this fly fishing community. And just thankful that you came on this show, man.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank y'all for the stories y'all tell. I'll tell you, y'all are y'all don't know how many days y'all have been my running buddy. Whenever I'm at the track on my lunch break, I just put my ear pods in and start my 3 mile jog with you guys. So
Wow,
Oh
it's
thank you
man,
for
always
that's
saying
it's
that,
awesome.
always
man.
good. Yeah.
Thanks for
So I
listening.
enjoy it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I enjoy it.
And a huge thank you to, and there's so many folks. We were at the fly fishing show in Atlanta, just not too long ago, or this past weekend for us, but I don't know exactly when this episode's actually going to air this season, but we were at the fly fishing show and we just had this wonderful experience of people coming up to us and going, we had our hats on like I'm wearing. If you're watching YouTube, I was wearing our Storied Outdoors hats together, and we had our uniform on, and people were, like, are you the guys from the Storied Outdoors? And we're like, yes. And they're like, we love listening to your show. And so it was such a treat to hear
Oh yeah.
people. It wasn't mom and them, it wasn't just mom and them listening. There are more people listening, and we are so thankful for all those folks that take time to listen, and these stories have encouraged people. We heard some of those sort of reports from different people that really connected to a particular story, particularly our friend Hugh. That's been an impactful story from
Oh
Hugh,
yeah.
and been a real blessing to people that are in a similar situation. Perhaps, your testimony of taking, something that was not good for you and turning that into something to channel that creativity in a way that was helpful and beneficial for you. Maybe that, is something somebody needs to hear. And that's why we love to share these stories. That's
Yeah.
why it's so beneficial for us to tell these stories and to find people like you to introduce to people that may not have ever come across your story, and it'll be impactful for them. And so that's why, man, we love doing what we do, and thankful for those that listen, and thankful for all those that have taken time to leave a review. If you want to help us grow the show and grow the podcast, make it easier to find, write a written review and leave a rating on your podcast platform, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcast or Google Cast or all the different podcast platforms. There are so many that I didn't even know existed until we started doing this. But usually there's a way to leave some kind of a review, and that really is a beneficial thing for the podcast to help grow that and help get the word out. If you have other questions or comments, you can email us at thestoriedoutdoors@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. If you have somebody that you think would be a great guest for our podcast, we would love to hear from you. We're constantly looking for stories to tell and people to meet and friends to make. And for more content, as far as pictures, Brandon has shared with us some pictures and some things from his site that'll be on our website. And so he'll have a dedicated page on thestoriedoutdoors.com for his episode and photos from some of his adventures and some of his just incredible artwork and flies that catch fish, but also look really cool on the wall. So thank you so much for sharing that. We hope these conversations really encourage people to be creative, to make art, to find ways to connect themselves to the creator and emulate something that you do really well and steward really well, Brandon. And we hope maybe they'll write them down. That's the other big thing that we hope for people to take time to write down their stories, share adventures, in the place that we love to call the storied outdoors.